Hi, I'm Patrick Tomlin from the University of Warwick. I wrote chapter 7 of this book, which is on the value of childhood. One of the things I'm trying to do in the chapter is to distinguish importantly different questions that we can ask about the value of childhood. So, for example, and it's important to distinguish, I think, between the question of is childhood valuable for a child versus is childhood a valuable part of a life. So to see how our views on these two issues might come apart, let's just take, for argument's sake, the view that a lot of philosophers hold, which is that childhood is a predicament to be overcome. So children are in general having less good lives than the adults that they will become. Now you might think, well, that shows that if that were true, that would show that childhood is not valuable. But that doesn't follow, because childhood could have other forms of value, and in particular, childhood is valuable to us as adults. So as parents, as grandparents, as aunts and uncles, just as members of society, we value having children in our lives. So even if we think, say, that childhood is not valuable for the child, we might think that childhood is valuable to us as a society overall. So that if a mad scientist were to come to us and say, hey, I found a way to speed up development and eradicate childhood, we might say, well, if we hold this view about childhood as being a predicament, we could say, well, that looks like it's good in one way, because we don't have to go through childhood, but overall we don't want your, mad scientist pill, because we value having children in the world. Having done that kind of preliminary work about distinguishing different questions, a lot of the chapter focuses on the question of, is childhood good for the children? So is someone who's currently experiencing childhood having a good or a bad life, in particular when we compare that with the lives of adults? Now, some people think this is just a crazy question to ask, that even asking this question is some kind of mistake. Clearly children are having wonderful lives. They're happy little souls who run around happily and don't have any responsibilities, and isn't that fantastic? Well, I think there is something to that, but we should also just pause for thought here. So one issue here is that we have good reasons to want that to be true, or at least a lot of us do. A lot of us are responsible for the existence of children, and we're desperately invested in the idea that they're having good lives, and we haven't done something terrible to them by forcing them to live in a childhood. And so, we need to be careful that, what we want to be true is not always true. The other reason, I think maybe even stronger reason to be sceptical of that view, at least as a view as to why not even, that we shouldn't even be looking at this question, is think about an adult, someone in an adult's body who has objectively the same life as a child. Maybe think about someone who has had a life as an adult, with full cognitive capacities and physical capacities, who is now in a somewhat childlike state. Do we think they are having a good life? A lot of us would be skeptical as to whether that life is as good as the adult life that they were leading before, and yet they are having the same kind of life as a child. So there is at least, I think, good reason to ask this question about whether or not childhood is actually a sort of good state of being. In addition to this, I think we have quite conflicting attitudes towards childhood. And I tried to bring these out through a pair of examples that I like to use. So imagine we have two children. Dane, we give a pill to speed up his development. So by the age he's, say, 10, Dane is a fully, developed adult. Erin, we give a different pill to, which slows down her development. So by the time she gets to 50, she's still like your average 5-year-old, say. Now, on the one hand, we think, poor Dane, he's missing out on his childhood. We really feel sorry for Dane. But we also feel sorry for Erin, because she's stuck in childhood. So on the one hand, we have this attitude that childhood is something that we want people to experience, and on the other hand, we have the attitude that it's not something we want them to experience for too long. So I find that conflicting kind of attitude quite interesting. Now you might think the obvious response to that is to say, well, yeah, people should experience childhood, but not for too long. But why would that be the case? It's just the case that that's how things are. But just because things are like that, it doesn't mean that that's the best way they could be. Finally, there's a question about whether or not the way we should measure how well a child's life is going is the same way that we should measure how an adult's life is going, or different. And quite a lot of the chapter is devoted to that question, because if we want to know how well children's lives are going, if we want to know if there's a good way of being, then we need to have a standard against which to measure their lives. And there's an interesting question about whether or not that's the same as how we measure adults' lives or different. Both ways of doing it seem to have problems. And a lot of the chapter is spent exploring the difficulties of either of those ways of thinking about the issue. I hope this little video has given you some kind of flavour of the kinds of questions I'm trying to address in the chapter. It's not a very opinionated chapter. I'm not kind of pushing a particular way of thinking about these issues. What I'm really trying to do is explore the issues and showing people the different kind of ways we might go on the various issues and the problems that seem to confront us whenever we start down any particular path. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the chapter.